As we all know, Russia, unable to continue the war in Ukraine on its own, has recruited North Korean soldiers for its army. However, this step could have unexpected consequences. According to one expert, if Kim Jong-un's troops have a hard time in Ukraine, there could be a mutiny from the North Korean army. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte confirmed that North Korean troops have been deployed to the Russian-owned KSK region, which was seized by Ukraine earlier this year. Rutte said this represents a significant escalation in North Korea's ongoing interference in Russia's illegal war. This statement came after the US announced that North Korea had deployed 3,000 troops to help Russia. But one expert believes there is a risk of anger within the North Korean military if the operation goes badly. Patrick Cronin, head of Asia-Pacific Security at the Hudson Institute, a Washington, D.C.-based research organization, said the deployment was small enough that Kim Jong-un can contain the potential risk of any military mutiny in North Korea if the operation goes poorly. Meanwhile, there are reports that Russian troops are not happy with the North Korean deployment. Ukrainian intelligence claims to have intercepted communications from Russian soldiers expressing regret for their new recruits. In one message, a Russian soldier added that the North Koreans cannot be commanded like their own and seem to be poorly trained. Speaking in Kiev after the deployment of North Korean troops in Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Ukraine was now forced to fight North Korea in Europe. The Wall Street Journal reports that North Korean troops are approaching the front line between Russia and Ukraine. But military analysts say they are not considered elite forces of Kim Jong-un's army. Intelligence and video footage show that many soldiers are likely teenagers and young men in the early stages of their service. These troops appear relatively short and thin, reflecting North Korea's problems with food shortages. The soldiers trained in the mountainous regions of South Korea with a focus on special forces operations, which are not ideal for the flat terrain in Ukraine. Their equipment is outdated, and they may never have left North Korea before. South Korean Defense Minister Kim Yo-han referred to them only as cannon fodder mercenaries. Estimates from the US, South Korea, and Ukraine suggest that around 3,000 North Korean troops have arrived in Russia this month, with some spotted in the KSK region near the Ukrainian border. Former South Korean official James J.B. Park suggests that Kim Jong-un may be testing Russia's response to North Korean intervention by initially sending less experienced soldiers. He believes that if Moscow demands more reinforcements, this could pave the way for more experienced ones. It remains unclear what role North Korean troops will play in the conflict. If Russia uses North Korean munitions, they could observe drone operations and data collection. According to the United States and NATO, North Korea's direct involvement in the conflict would mark a major escalation. Analyst Samuel Kranievans notes that the initial deployment could be positioned as a defensive measure. South Korean intelligence reports that the political impact of possible frontline losses in North Korea will be limited due to the isolation of the soldiers' families. According to their data, North Korea could send up to 10,000 soldiers by December, although Kim Jong-un often refers to his army as the strongest in the world. The country has not participated in major conflicts since the Korean War between 1950 and 1953. North Korea has acted with its interests in mind and sent troops to Russia to support the war against Ukraine. According to the Defense Ministry's main intelligence directorate, some North Korean troops are already deployed in the direction of KSK. Putin stated that the deployment was linked to the strategic partnership agreement between Russia and North Korea. EU High Representative for Foreign Policy Josep Borrell emphasized that the arms trade between North Korea and Russia violates UN resolutions. Alongside all this, another problem has emerged. The arrival of about 3,000 North Korean soldiers in Russia was not well received by the Russian military. They raised concerns about how the North Korean troops would be commanded and equipped with ammunition and military supplies. As we know, Russia has a huge equipment problem, and the Russian economy is struggling to cover the cost of the war. Russian soldiers were not pleased that the needs of the North Korean soldiers were being fully met. One of the barriers to understanding between Russian and North Korean soldiers was language. Due to this language barrier, the Russian military is finding it difficult to integrate North Korean soldiers into their ranks, causing anger among their troops. Soldiers who are having trouble getting along are currently struggling to adapt on the front line. In addition, It is claimed that Russia may be forced to end the war in Ukraine as the country's economy has reached the point of exhaustion. After President Vladimir Putin launched the full-scale invasion, the West imposed far-reaching sanctions on Moscow. As a result, Putin has become increasingly dependent on Russia's cash reserves and has been forced to implement numerous measures to shore them up. This led to the Russian central bank raising interest rates to a record 21% in a bid to combat inflation. The US-based think tank Institute for the Study of War believes that this economic situation could lead to Russia being unable to finance its war. Russian resources are limited, and Putin cannot cover these costs indefinitely. The Russian economy will reach the point of exhaustion. The think tank added that Russia's economy and war effort are coming under increasing pressure. This development comes after an ally of Putin warned that if this economic reality continues, many businesses in Russia will go bankrupt. Sergei Kov, CEO of state-owned Rostik, commented that there is no 20% profitability anywhere. Maybe in the drug trade, but not even in arms sales. It is not profitable for businesses to use borrowed funds. I have said this many times before, if we continue to operate this way, almost the majority of businesses will go bankrupt. Faisal Asov, a senior economist at the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies, stated that the main problem is that private sector investment has already started to weaken, as borrowing costs in many sectors reportedly exceed profitability. Nabina's counterargument is that this will create a window of opportunity for businesses that invest to make a profit rather than take out loans. I am not convinced by this argument, and I am not sure that it is very wise for the central bank to fight inflation at all costs, especially given that inflation is increasingly driven by supply-side factors. Political struggles continue apace. For weeks, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been pushing Western leaders to back his victory plan, which he claims will end the country's war with Russia. However, Zelensky has received only tepid rhetorical support. No country has allowed Ukraine to fire Western long-range missiles at military targets deep inside Russia. And no major power has openly endorsed Ukraine's invitation to join NATO while the war is still raging. By this measure, Zelensky's lobbying in the United States and Europe over the past 6 weeks may have failed. However, some military analysts and diplomats say the real target audience for the plan may be at home. Zelensky could use his hard sell to show Ukrainians that he is doing everything he can to prepare them for the possibility that Ukraine might have to make a deal and to provide a convenient scapegoat in the West, given waning Western support, losses on the Eastern Front, and in Russia's KSK region, and the upcoming US elections that could mean a radically different policy toward Ukraine. Zelensky may have no choice. Michael John Williams, professor of international relations at Syracuse University and former advisor to NATO, stated that to push the plan, he has to go with his hat in his hand. He has to set a position and then, when asked, he has to say this is what we have to do now. At least he can say he tried, he has exhausted the possibilities. Zelensky is doing his best to get the US and other allies to commit to what he believes Ukraine needs, so he can negotiate from a position of strength. The Ukrainian president is using the arrival of North Korean troops to fight alongside the Russians in KSK to try to gain some momentum for his plan. In an interview with reporters last week, Zelensky said that if the West does not support his plan, there is no plan B. He stated, "I don't insist on doing it exactly this way. I said it would work. If you have an alternative, please go ahead." He reiterated that he is still against the transfer of territory, but he also talked about diplomatic steps to resolve issues such as protecting energy infrastructure and establishing a secure shipping corridor from Ukraine to the Black Sea. He pointed to an approach that could allow Ukraine to save face if it does not take back all the territory seized by Russia. No one will recognize occupied territories as legally belonging to other states. US officials have privately expressed some exasperation with Zelensky's victory plan, calling it unrealistic and almost entirely dependent on Western aid. They spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive military information. On the other hand, there was another important development. The G7 leaders finalized the details of a $50 billion loan to help Kiev, backed by profits from Russian state assets frozen after the invasion of Ukraine. The leaders of the 7 rich democracies said they had reached a consensus on how to distribute the nearly $50 billion loan and aim to start dispersing the funds by the end of this year. The G7 leaders issued a statement saying the loan proceeds will be distributed through various channels to support Ukraine's budgetary, military, and reconstruction assistance. The announcement came after world finance leaders met in Washington this week, hosted by the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. The finance ministers agreed on a technical solution that will ensure coherence, coordination. 7 rich democracies said they had reached consensus on how to distribute the nearly $50 billion loan and aim to start dispersing the funds by the end of this year. The G7 leaders issued the following statement: the loan proceeds will be distributed through various channels to support Ukraine's budgetary, military, and reconstruction assistance. They said the announcement came after finance leaders met in Washington this week, hosted by the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. The finance ministers agreed on a technical solution that will ensure coherence, coordination, fair credit distribution, and solidarity among G7 partners. The statement said, "We will not waver in our determination to give Ukraine the support it needs to prevail." The leaders added they called on Moscow to end its war and pay for the damage done to Ukraine. This week, US President Joe Biden said that as part of the G7 package, the US would provide a $2 billion loan to Ukraine, which would be repaid with interest from immobilized Russian sovereign assets. This is intended to support Ukraine now without burdening taxpayers. Biden said our efforts clearly demonstrate that bullies will be responsible for the damage they cause. US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen signed a statement with her Ukrainian counterpart Sergei Marchenko on Wednesday, stating their intention to enter into the loan. The move also pledged that new US or Ukrainian tax dollars would not be a source of repayment. Economic concerns remain top of mind for US voters with the country's presidential election just over a week away. Washington aims to provide at least $10 billion of the loans for economic support, with the other half expected to be in the form of military aid. But this will require additional authorization from Congress. The remaining $30 billion is planned to come from G7 partners, including the European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Japan. US officials said the G7 statement issued the other day said, "We have once again made clear our unwavering determination to stand by Ukraine for as long as it takes. Time is not on the side of President Vladimir Putin." In addition, the sanctions against Russia are not yielding the desired results. Since the beginning of Russia's aggression in Ukraine, the European Union, the United States, and the G7 have imposed unprecedented sanctions against Moscow. Restrictions on oil exports are a key part of the package. They reduce the Russian state's income from this highly lucrative market, which is essential for financing the war effort. The country is therefore making significant efforts to avoid these sanctions. But investigations reveal a large-scale system of detours organized by a galaxy of companies linked to Coral Energy, a commodities trading company. This company, based in Geneva and Dubai, was Russia's privileged partner before the war in Ukraine. The company claims that it terminated its contracts with Russia at the beginning of 2022 and complied with Western sanctions. But our research disproves this version of events. Through offshore companies, a fleet of stealth cargo ships, and secret cargo transshipments, Coral Energy helped Russia illegally export a significant portion of its oil to the rest of the world. Its trading activities were supported by financing from European banks, including Société Générale, and acquisitions from several major oil companies, including Total Energies. Analyst research reveals flaws in the Western sanction system, whose effectiveness has been eroded by price ceiling systems under which Russia cannot sell its oil. The aim is to reduce Russia's revenues without causing a spike in inflation in Europe and affecting the indebtedness of southern countries, risking that these countries move further away from the West. Today, however, 70% of exports are trading above this price ceiling, and Russia is significantly increasing its earnings. The EU can only blame itself for allowing Greece to sell so many tankers to Russia in 2022. They have bloated fleets of ghost ships flying flags of convenience, which blur the traceability of the origin of hydrocarbons and thus enable higher prices to be charged. Not to mention the environmental risk to European coasts. Issuing a sanctions decree is not the most difficult thing, they just need to be implemented. Like the US, the EU has no single administration to investigate possible violations. It is up to each member state to implement sanctions. Above all, The resources allocated are insufficient, and the legal arsenal remains inadequate in many countries. There is no criminal risk, and fines are not very deterrent. Added to this is the hypocrisy of banks and oil companies working with companies with dubious reputations. They show little due diligence in suspicious transactions and, above all, try to protect themselves legally. Finally, there is the question of the responsibility of the states that harbor the oil trade and allow it to flourish without transparency. Switzerland had the courage to abandon its neutrality and adopt most of the sanctions. Now it must show that it can ensure that banks and trading companies established on its territory comply with them. On the other hand, there has been another important development. A bilateral document is being prepared between Ukraine and Hungary on security issues, particularly Ukraine's accession to NATO. President Volodymyr Zelensky said this at a meeting with heads of communities and districts. A bilateral document is being prepared between Ukraine and Hungary. It contains many elements to respond to modern, future and past challenges, to eliminate conflicts and to ensure that the issue of minorities is not raised. More precisely, the issue may come up, but it needs to be resolved quickly to avoid question marks between our countries. We look at it very positively. Security issues are also part of this document. Zelensky added, "We ask Hungary at least not to block Ukraine's invitation to NATO, that is, not to support us or vote against us. Just not to block it." Reportedly, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán paid an official visit to Kiev on July 2 this year, the first since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. In the wake of all this, there has been renewed discussion of North Korean troops joining the Russian army. On Wednesday, US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and his South Korean counterpart Kim Jong-Un called on North Korea to withdraw about 10,000 of its troops from Russia. Both countries believe that these troops will fight on Russia's side in the war in Ukraine. Austin said at a joint press conference at the Pentagon that they are doing it because Russian President Vladimir Putin has lost a lot of troops. He has a choice to either convince other people to help him or mobilize. And he doesn't want to mobilize because then people in Russia will start to realize the extent of his losses. US officials say that more than 500,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or wounded in Ukraine since Russia launched its full-scale illegal occupation on February 24, 2022. They say Russia is now turning to the pariah state of North Korea to consolidate its forces. Kim Jong-un has not hesitated to sell his youth and soldiers as cannon fodder mercenaries. I believe that such activities are not only inhumane but also constitute a non-peaceful war crime. Western countries have expressed concern about what the Kim Jong-un regime will get from Moscow in exchange for its soldiers. North Korea is under international sanctions for its illegal nuclear ballistic missile programs. South Korea's defense minister said North Korea is likely to demand nuclear weapons and intercontinental ballistic missile technology in exchange for troops, raising security threats on the peninsula and around the world. As we have seen, Russia's aggressive policy, paired with a power like itself, has sent danger signals around the world. Ukraine, with the support of the United States, Britain, France, Japan, South Korea, Slovenia, and Malta, has requested a meeting of the United Nations Security Council to discuss the issue. Russia's envoy rejected the meeting, saying it was organized to smear Moscow with more lies and disinformation, and said the claim that North Korean troops were in Russia was patently false. Ambassador Vasily Nebenzia's statements appear to contradict those of Putin, who last week did not deny that North Korean troops were currently in Russia and said Moscow would decide how to deploy them under the Mutual Defense Security Agreement he signed with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in June. Nebenzia suggested that Western countries have made accusations that North Korean troops are helping Moscow to persuade South Korea to supply arms to Ukraine. Nebenzia continued, "Today in the Security Council, we can see that the Western show is pursuing another goal. For 2 years now, the Zelensky regime and its collaborators have been pushing the Republic of Korea to cooperate more actively with the Kiev regime and enable them to supply much-needed lethal weapons. In such a situation, North Korea and Russia will be caught in a big vortex." Thank you for watching. Let me know if you need further modifications.